Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. We're doing another Chatty Get Ready with me. I am actually taking my partner's cat to the vet today. And then I'm going to be filming some content after that, but I figured I had some time this morning and wanted to sit down and chat with you while I got ready for my day. Also, I'm wearing the funniest shirt to take him to the vet. It's one of those shirts from Nice Shirt Thanks. It says, "How are you feeling?" And then perfectly overwhelmed about everything and nothing, which I can't think of a better shirt to wear to a vet appointment for an angry cat. So on brand. So I just posted my intro to genital piercing video here on YouTube and it's doing really well. Thank you so much for all the support. But I got a ton of comments and also a ton of messages on my Instagram and comments on my TikTok about talking about trans and non-binary experiences with genital piercings. And this is a topic that I've talked about a bunch on my blog and on my TikTok, but I know that everyone really wants me to make some long format YouTube videos about it as well. And never fret, I will be. But every time I sit down to get started with that, it's always a little overwhelming because there's so many different topics that I want to talk about or film about, and I don't even ever know where to start. So I figured what better way to start than just talk about my own experiences with gender and body piercing and things like that. So yeah, I wanted to just do a little chatty get ready with me where I discussed my experiences and my feelings and thoughts with this. So as many of you at home may or may not know, I am non-binary, which means that I do not identify as a man or a woman, and I would say I've felt pretty non-binary basically my whole life. I've never felt like the typical gender roles or expectations of men or women ever fully fit me. I spent a lot of my childhood being called a tomboy and wearing boys' clothes and playing with boys' toys. And in high school, I wore boys' and men's clothing, and I did bind a little bit. As I got older, I started to embrace my femininity. I went super far the opposite direction. I wore heels and skirts constantly. I was hyper femme. And then I found kind of this middle ground in between the two that was somehow simultaneously neither and both. And when I think about it, male or female just doesn't really feel like it fits me. Neither of those feel quite right, whereas non-binary does. And when I think about what I would love for my gender or my body if surgeries like this were possible, it would be something in between the two. Unfortunately, tech is not where I would want it to be to have the body that I would want, and it probably won't be in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy my gender expression as it is. And I think it's important to note while we're on the subject that being non-binary looks different for everyone. So what being non-binary looks like for me may not be what being non-binary looks like for someone else. So worth keeping in mind. And for those wondering at home, I use both she and they pronouns. And honestly, if you heed me, I wouldn't be mad about it either. But for me, I feel like body piercing has kind of always been a part of gender expression. And that started from a super young age. I mean, my mom had my ears pierced as basically a baby. I was super, super little. And my biological father is Hispanic, and that is very common practice in his culture. And little girls are given earrings basically right away. You pop out of the womb, you got earrings. That's just kind of how it's done. And from the get-go, that is experiencing body piercings as a part of gender, because earrings are considered a feminine or a feminizing modification that you make to a little baby girl's body. So right away, one of my first experiences with gender was piercing, was having my ears pierced as an infant and growing up as a little girl and being given earrings or told how special these earrings were. Now that I'm sitting down to film this and chat about it, it really is a lot of like women and femmes and AFAB people's first experience with gender a lot of times is body piercing. Huh. And I was in love with earrings and piercings and jewelry basically right from the get-go. I mean, I was like 5 or 6 and asking to get my second lobe piercings done. I was into it. For me, these piercings were like, it was a very ultimately feminine thing to have these ear piercings and wear this jewelry. And I remember being very little, and my grandmother had a friend who owned a jewelry store, and she would go there and have like drinks, and they would chat, and I would hang out, and I would play with like the costume jewelry in the back, and I just loved all of the earrings. And there was something so decidedly like feminine and beautiful and powerful about all of that jewelry that I was just enraptured with from like a very, very young age. And then I remember being very young, being on a family trip to Washington, D.C., and seeing a man who was dressed like super goth, but had these big chunky hoops in his nose, and seeing those and thinking that they were very masculine to me at that age, even though, you know, as an adult, piercings have no gender. But as a young child, I looked at those piercings and felt like they were very masculine. And B, like falling in love with them and like obsessing over how these nose rings looked on this man, and like just all I wanted was my nose pierced from like the age of 7 or 8 up until like 13, when I finally convinced my parents to let me get it done. I wanted a nose piercing desperately after I saw this man. And when I was in high school, which again was when I was, you know, dressing a little bit more masculine, and there was a time in high school when I thought that I like might be trans, like a trans man, and this was before I really had the language to discuss like being non-binary and feeling like a combination of both but also neither. So I just wasn't really sure. I was like ace tape binding, like you shouldn't do, don't do that, but I was young and didn't know any better and things like that, and I got a lot of like what I thought at the time were masculinizing piercings. So I was in high school and I had a big thick hoop in my eyebrow. I wanted my nostril pierced at a 14 gauge with a big chunky hoop. I had a center labret piercing with like a big steel ball in it. I can probably find some pictures that I'll throw up here. But I got these piercings that to me at the time felt very masculine and very masculinizing on my features. And between that and having shorter hair and how I carried myself, that was a huge part of my gender expression and my experience of gender at the time. And you know, in high school, you don't have a ton of agency over your body. You have some, but not as much as, you know, adults do. And piercings for me were a way to use that agency to express myself. Now, back at the time, I could have never told you that those piercings were gender affirming. It's really like reflecting back on it and back on how they made me feel that I'm like able to label them as such. But I do just very, very distinctly remember, especially when I got my eyebrow pierced, like it was really something that you mostly saw men with, especially like online, like on Tumblr and stuff. And a lot of male musicians that I liked at the time had it. I remember looking in the mirror and being like, damn, I look so cool and so tough. And there was definitely, I would say, like opening up a connection within me with a side that felt more masculine is like the best language I have for it currently. But at the same time, that side of me that was a little girl playing with jewelry in her grandmother's friend's store, she never completely went away. I think I felt like I had to be one or the other. I felt confined within the gender binary. So it was either like early out in high school, it was I want to be masculine, so I have to be a man, and I have to like wear men's clothes and bind and have the super short hair and these masculine piercings, and like it's that or womanhood. Those are my only two options. And then as time went on, I wanted to lean into the feminine, so I started to wear dresses and skirts and high heels all the time, and I very much felt like, well, if I want to be like feminine, I have to be feminine, like that's all I can be. And that would have been around the time that I started doing like my ear curations and my ear projects, and I wanted to wear all this gold and all these pretty things, and it was hyper feminine. It was almost womanhood as a performance, as a costume, as a shield. And it really wasn't until much later in life that I took the time, and I'd known people throughout this time who were non-binary, but I was like, oh, that's not me. And I spent a lot of time online following non-binary creators and reading gender discourse and things like that, but I was like, oh, that's not me. I'm just a really good ally. I'm just a really good trans ally. Is the ally to gender nonconforming pipeline. And it was honestly, it was working with Rob, where like very early on I had a day where I was like talking to Rob and I was like, hey, so like I'm having some non-binary feelings. And he was just like, you think? And he gave me my first binder, and it's just been super right ever since. Oh. You can hear my cat playing with his little chirpy bird toy back there. He loves that thing. It's so loud. But once I finally was able to like really identify as non-binary and like give myself that label and that freedom to be open about it and not put myself so strictly in one box or the other, that's where I think I really began to get comfortable with it. And very, very quickly after becoming non-binary, I got some genital piercing work done that I had wanted for a very, very long time, that unfortunately, due to being in an abusive relationship, I was unable to get. And that was big. That was big. I don't have a ton of bottom dysphoria, in so much as like what I would want for down there just isn't possible. It just doesn't exist, and I'm okay with that. But wow, did getting those piercings change my relationship with those parts of my body and how I felt about those parts of my body, and I was unreal. Now, I had already had some genital work done in the past. Basically, like the moment I turned 18, I ran out to go get my VCH pierced. I knew I wanted that for a very long time. And for me, that one was about like healing from sexual trauma I had experienced as a teen and like taking my body back from experiences with CSA. And if you want me to talk about that, I can. But I didn't do too much after that, although I wanted other piercings for many years. It was just not how things played out. And then I was in a relationship where I was not allowed to get those piercings. And I didn't end up having the time to heal them and get them and stuff until I was already like beginning to be out with my gender identity and beginning to experiment with that. And initially they were just piercings that I'd like always kind of low-key wanted. I hadn't put a ton of thought into them. I know it's terrible to hear me as a piercer say that I wanted these like genital piercings, which I always preach about putting a bunch of thought into, and I didn't. But I just like, I knew subconsciously with the knowledge I had about these piercings that these were piercings that I would want and that I would enjoy. And I didn't really like delve too much deeper into that. But once I got them done, along the same time that I was like dealing with things with my gender, like I remember I did a series of outer labia piercings, and I looked in the mirror after the first one and I was like, oh, maybe there was a little bottom dysphoria happening there. Maybe this whole time I labeled it as just being insecure about my bits thanks to porn and unrealistic beauty standards and teeny tiny bikini bottoms, but it was actually a little bit of dysphoria, and piercing fixed that. And piercing fixed that. And I've talked a bunch about my TikTok about doing genital piercings for trans men, specifically labia piercings that can have a really masculinizing effect on like body movement, walking, standing, sitting, things like that. And like underwear that you wear, you know, boxers become significantly more comfortable than other things, and lots of elements like that. And while I didn't go that far with my set, I didn't do like the super big jewelry or anything like that, I do opt to wear jewelry that has a little bit of that effect for me. I do like sit different differently and move differently thanks to these piercings, and I do feel like that has a masculinizing effect on my body. I also grew up and got into this industry in the BME age of things. For those who are not familiar with BME, Body Modification E-Zine, it was a very big website that was happening before we had like Facebook groups and Reddit forums and TikTok and YouTube to talk about piercings and modifications. And it was a very adult site, and there was a lot of genital piercing content on there, and there was a lot of pretty extreme genital piercing content on there. These days, that's pretty hard to find on the internet. There's some subreddits for it and like some sites that host it, but it's not as widely spread. But I grew up, probably younger than I should have been, seeing a lot of these pictures of very extremely pierced and modified genitals, and at a point they become so separate from how we assume those genitals of that gender are supposed to look. When we see people who have dozens and dozens of piercings or heavier modifications, tattoos, pearling, it starts to look like a different organ entirely, like something not male and not female, and something all its own. And especially when you start adding in custom jewelry, I mean, people wear all sorts of gorgeous pieces in their genitals, and suddenly there's as much like bright shiny metal as there is like soft supple skin, and it's beautiful, it's breathtaking, and it becomes this completely unique variation on what you would expect that genitalia to look like. It becomes its own thing. And I realized over time, as someone who is non-binary, that like, given that what I would have done for surgery is like literally not possible, that was really like the next most perfect thing for me. Was not necessarily getting bottom surgery or just changing what I had to be what a different gender has, but rather making something that was totally my own, that was unique to me, using piercings and tattoos and modifications to create genitalia that felt right for me. And once I had that like epiphany, that aha moment talking with Rob, I really realized that is what a lot of us, whether we're cisgender or trans or non-binary, do with our bodies already. And things like piercings and modifications, whether they're super simple or whether they're more extreme, are all ways of customizing our body. And that's a concept that most folks interested in modification are already familiar with. We use our modifications to customize our bodies in a way that we like, in a way that works for us. But how many of us have put the language to it that in that way we are also customizing our gender presentation, and that even if there's small changes, even if they're just a few piercings or a couple tattoos here and there or dyed hair or a haircut, it's still customizing that expression to fit us. And once it dawned on me that I had really been playing with gender with my piercings this whole time, and that this feeling of customizing my body with these piercings was not just about like, you know, when I was younger, I really was like, you know, I'm not supposed to curse on YouTube. It's so hard. It's so hard. I was like, forget about societal beauty standards and like what a woman is supposed to look like. Like, I'm gonna get these piercings and these tattoos and I'm gonna be beautiful anyway. And I realized as I got older and as I had more language and more understanding and a better relationship with my body, that also what I was saying was, forget about these gender standards. It all cycled right back to the fact that my first experience with like altering my body for gender was ear piercings, and that piercings were one of my first experiences of being gendered as a woman, as a girl. And it dawned on me that I had spent my whole life getting these piercings and these tattoos and cutting my hair, not only to say that like I was the arbiter and the creator of my own beauty and my own body image, but I was also the arbiter and the creator of my own gender identity. And I really thought back at how often I had gendered or stereotyped different piercings or different hairstyles or different things. We all do. It's ingrained in us from birth. But the way that I had then used those things to play with my own lived experience of gender and play with gender as it suited my body. I'm getting emotional just talking about it, because when we talk about piercings and transgender and non-binary and cisgender experiences, because piercings can be gender affirming for cisgender folks too. Don't for one second think that most women going out and getting nipple piercings, that those aren't gender affirming for those women. And that cis women are taught from birth to hate their breasts and be insecure about them, and that they'll never measure up to the porn stars and the models, and piercing your nipples is a radical way of loving your body in the face of that. But it is also gender affirming, and it makes you feel beautiful about something that is a part of your gender. And it's the same for cis women as it is for trans women. But when we talk about body piercings and trans and non-binary folks and like gender affirming piercings, I think a lot of folks go directly to genital piercings. And I would say there's probably the biggest conversation to be had in regards to genital piercing. There's a lot to talk about there, the ways it can work for bottom dysphoria, the functions it can provide. I am gonna make like 80 million videos about them. But it's also all piercings, you know? It's a trans woman's experience getting her ears pierced for the first time, and it's doing eyebrow piercings for a trans man to try and help his facial structure feel more masculine and to accentuate his brow bone. And it's a non-binary person getting weird with cool different piercings and jewelry in efforts to look like an alien or a goblin or a fairy or an elf or something that's entirely outside of the realm of human and male or female and the limited binary that we experience. It's a little girl getting her ears pierced for the first time because her mom and all of her older sisters have them. And for her, that's a piercing that symbolizes her transition towards womanhood and celebrates that. And that's gender affirming, even for a cisgender girl. And that's not to say that every single piercing that someone gets is gender affirming. It's not. Sometimes we just get them because they're pretty or they're fun or things like that. But for me as a non-binary person, when I look back at cumulatively all of the experiences I have had with body piercing, going all the way back to getting my ears pierced as a very little girl, there was always an attachment of gender there. And when I think about being young and growing up, I didn't see a lot of men with ear piercings back then, so I associated them as a very feminine thing. But I did start to see male singers and performers in the genres I liked with certain facial piercings. I associated them with a level of masculinity. And now, as a non-binary adult, I realize that piercings don't have any gender, and that they don't belong as male piercings or as female piercings, as masculine or feminine, that they can be whatever we make of it, but that some people will have certain cultural or religious or spiritual views surrounding certain piercings, and they may use those to affirm whatever their gender is, whether it's the gender that they had from birth or whether they are trans or non-binary, and that we can all experience these piercings in a way that best suits us and best suits our body and best celebrates our body. And especially as a body piercing historian, looking at the historical links between piercing and gender identity and the way so many different cultures had piercings that were uniquely tied in with gender and uniquely tied in with the coming of age experiences of different genders. And also the way people who were historically always non-binary or trans also utilized those piercings as part of their gender experience, dating all the way back to some of our earliest recorded record of history and body piercings. You know, this is not a new thing. This is not like a new trend. This is something that we as humans have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And we are simply continuing the traditions that our ancestors gave to us before us. And I would say that if there's anything that I hope that people would take away from this video and the content that I'll make going forward about piercings and gender expression, it's that Not all piercings have to be or are gender affirming, but that many can be, especially in ways that surprise you. And I would encourage anyone who has any piercings to take some time to sit with themselves and think about their piercings and their experience of gender, and how those piercings maybe haven't done anything at all, but maybe have really affirmed things for them. And especially people who are women or femmes or grew up AFAB, our relationship with piercings, if you had your ears pierced as a little girl or when you were very young, is intrinsically linked with gender. And that was an experience many of us had as a child. And on the flip side, it was an experience that a lot of men and AMAB folks didn't get to have and were denied getting piercings at a young age when they first started asking with them, because we were intrinsically linking piercing and gender expression. And if some of our earliest experiences with piercing was related to gender expression and gender affirmation, or used to deny a gender identity or a modification that we wanted, how could we not grow up and continue to associate those things together? Anyway, that was my chatty, rambly, get ready with me. I don't script these. I just sit down and like word vomit everything I'm thinking. And I feel like this was some of the most coherent I have ever put my thoughts surrounding piercings and gender expression into words. And there's still so much that I want to work on and self-evaluate and self-explore and then express. But I feel like this took me a step further than I have in the past. So thank you for hanging out and letting me talk about that and share that with you. And I'd love to hear some of your stories about your experiences with piercings and gender in the comments below. I would love to chat about them. I'd love to chat about what you think of my take. Does it align with yours? Did it give you something new to think about? Does it completely disagree with yours? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this in the comments. I love this, and worry not, I will be making many more videos about this topic to come, so stay tuned. I'm gonna go take Angry Grumpy Man to the vet, and have a wonderful rest of your day. I know we'll be sitting down to chat soon. Bye. Do you deserve a treat for going to the vet? Yes? Yeah? It's right there.